File 9.
Chapter 6. In a moment we were in a French village. We walked through a great factory of some sort, where men and women and little children were toiling in heat and dirt and a fog of dust, and they were clothed in rags and drooped at their work, for they were worn and half-starved, and weak and drowsy. Satan said, "It is some more moral sense. The proprietors are rich and very holy, but the wage they pay to these poor brothers and sisters of theirs is only enough to keep them from dropping dead with hunger. The work hours are 14 per day, winter and summer, from 6 in the morning till 8 at night, little children and all, and they walk to and from the pigsties which they inhabit, 4 miles each way, through mud and slush, rain, snow, sleet and storm, daily, year in and year out. They get 4 hours of sleep. They kennel together, these families, in a room in unimaginable filth and stench, and disease comes, and they die off like flies. Have they committed a crime, these mangy things? No. What have they done that they're punished so? Nothing at all, except getting themselves born into your foolish race. You've seen how they treat a Miss Dure there in the jail. Now you see how they treat the innocent and the worthy. Is your race logical? Are these ill-smelling innocents better off than that heretic? Indeed, no. His punishment is trivial compared with theirs. They broke him on the wheel and smashed him to rags and pulp after we left, and he's dead now and free of your precious race. But these poor slaves here, why, they've been dying for years, and some of them will not escape from life for years to come. It is the moral sense which teaches the factory proprietors the difference between right and wrong. You perceive the result. They think themselves better than dogs. Ah, you are such an illogical, unreasoning race, and paltry. Oh, unspeakably." Then he dropped all seriousness, and just overstrained himself, making fun of us and deriding our pride in our warlike deeds, our great heroes, our imperishable fames, our mighty kings, our ancient aristocracies, our venerable history, and laughed till it was enough to make a person sick to hear him. And finally he sobered a little and said, "But after all, it's not all ridiculous. There is a sort of pathos about it when you remember how few are your days, how childish your pomps, and what shadows you are." Presently all things vanished suddenly from my sight, and I knew what it meant. The next moment we were walking along in our village, and down toward the river I saw the twinkling lights of the Golden Stag. Then, in the dark, I heard a joyful cry. "He's come again!" It was Seppi Vollmeier. He had felt his blood leap and his spirits rise in a way that could mean only one thing, and he knew Satan was near, although it was too dark to see him. He came to us, and we walked along together, and Seppi poured out his gladness like water. It was as if he were a lover, and had found his sweetheart who had been lost. Seppi was a smart and animated boy, and had enthusiasm and expression, and was a contrast to Nicolaus and me. He was full of the last new mystery now, the disappearance of Hans Oppert, the village loafer. People were beginning to be curious about it, he said. He did not say anxious. Curious was the right word, and strong enough. No one had seen Hans for a couple of days. "Not since he did that brutal thing, you know," he said. "What brutal thing?" It was Satan that asked. "Well, he's always clubbing his dog, which is a good dog and his only friend, and is faithful and loves him, and does no one any harm. And 2 days ago he was at it again, just for nothing, just for pleasure, and the dog was howling and begging, and Theodore and I begged too, but he threatened us and struck the dog again with all his might, and knocked one of its eyes out, and he said to us, 'There, I hope you're satisfied now. That's what you got for him by your damned meddling.' And he laughed, the heartless brute." Seppi's voice trembled with pity and anger. I guessed what Satan would say, and he said it. "There is that misused word again, that shabby slander. Brutes do not act like that. Only men." "Well, it was inhuman, anyway." "No, it wasn't, Seppi. It was human, quite distinctly human. It is not pleasant to hear you libel the higher animals by attributing to them dispositions which they are free from, and which are found nowhere but in the human heart. None of the higher animals is tainted with the disease called the moral sense. Purify your language, Seppi. Drop those lying phrases out of it." He spoke pretty sternly, for him, and I was sorry I hadn't warned Seppi to be more particular about the word he used. I knew how he was feeling. He would not want to offend Satan. He would rather offend all his kin. There was an uncomfortable silence, but relief soon came, for that poor dog came along now, with his eye hanging down, and went straight to Satan and began to moan and mutter brokenly. And Satan began to answer in the same way, and it was plain that they were talking together in the dog language. We all sat down in the grass in the moonlight, for the clouds were breaking away now, and Satan took the dog's head in his lap and put the eye back in its place, and the dog was comfortable, and he wagged his tail and licked Satan's hand, and looked thankful, and said the same. I knew he was saying it, though I did not understand the words. Then the two talked together a bit, and Satan said, "He says his master was drunk." "Yes, he was," said we. "And an hour later he fell over the precipice there beyond the cliff pasture." "Oh, we know the place. It's 3 miles from here." "And the dog has been often to the village, begging people to go there, but he was only driven away and not listened to." We remembered it, but hadn't understood what he wanted. He only wanted help for the man who had misused him, and he thought only of that, and has had no food, nor sought any. He's watched by his master 2 nights. What do you think of your race? Is heaven reserved for it, and this dog ruled out, as your teachers tell you? Can your race add anything to this dog's stock of morals and magnanimities?" He spoke to the creature, who jumped up, eager and happy, and apparently ready for orders and impatient to execute them. "Get some of the oldest villagers. Get some men. Go up with the dog. He will show you that carrion, and take a priest along to arrange about insurance, for death is near." With the last word he vanished, to our sorrow and disappointment. We got the men and Father Adolf, and we saw the man die. Nobody cared but the dog. He mourned and grieved and licked the dead face, and could not be comforted. We buried him where he was, and without a coffin, for he had no money, and no friend but the dog. If we had been an hour earlier, The priest would have been in time to send that poor creature to heaven. But now he was gone down into the awful fires, to burn forever. It seemed such a pity that in a world where so many people have difficulty to put in their time, one little hour could not have been spared for this poor creature who needed it so much, and to whom it would have made the difference between eternal joy and eternal pain. It gave an appalling idea of the value of an hour, and I thought I could never waste one again without remorse and terror. Seppi was depressed and grieved, and said it must be so much better to be a dog and not run such awful risks. We took this one home with us, and kept him for our own. Seppi had a very good thought as we were walking along, and it cheered us up, and made us feel much better. He said the dog had forgiven the man that had wronged him so, and maybe God would accept that absolution. There was a very dull week now, for Satan did not come. Nothing much was going on, and we boys could not venture to go and see Margaret, because the nights were moonlit, and our parents might find out if we tried. But we came across Ursula a couple of times, taking a walk in the meadows beyond the river to air the cat, and we learned from her that things were going well. She had natty new clothes on, and bore a prosperous look. The 4 groschen a day were arriving without a break, but were not being spent for food and wine and such things. The cat tended to all of that. Margaret was enduring her forsakenness and isolation fairly well, all things considered, and was cheerful by the help of Wilhelm Meidling. She spent an hour or 2 every night in the jail with her uncle, and had fattened him up with the cat's contributions. But she was curious to know more about Philip Traum, and hoped I would bring him again. Ursula was curious about him herself, and asked a good many questions about his uncle. It made the boys laugh, for I had told them the nonsense Satan had been stuffing her with. She got no satisfaction out of us, our tongues being tied. Ursula gave us a small item of information. Money being plenty now, she had taken on a servant to help about the house and run errands. She tried to tell it in a commonplace, matter-of-course way, but she was so set up by it and so vain of it that her pride in it leaked out pretty plainly. It was beautiful to see her veiled delight in this grandeur, poor old thing. But when we heard the name of the servant, we wondered if she had been altogether wise. For although we were young and often thoughtless, we had fairly good perception on some matters. This boy was Gottfried Nahr, a dull, good creature with no harm in him, and nothing against him personally. Still, he was under a cloud, and properly so, for it had not been 6 months since a social blight had mildewed the family. His grandmother had been burned as a witch. When that kind of a malady is in the blood, it does not always come out with just one burning. Just now was not a good time for Ursula and Margaret to be having dealings with a member of such a family, for the witch terror had risen higher during the past year than it had ever reached in the memory of the oldest villagers. The mere mention of a witch was about enough to frighten us out of our wits. This was natural enough, because of late years there were more kinds of witches than there used to be. In old times it had been only old women, but of late years they were of all ages, even children of 8 and 9. It was getting so that anybody might turn out to be a familiar of the devil. Age and sex hadn't anything to do with it. In our little region we had tried to extirpate the witches, but the more of them we burned, the more of the breed rose up in their places. Once, in a school for girls only 10 miles away, the teachers found that the back of one of the girls was all red and inflamed, and they were greatly frightened, believing it to be the devil's marks. The girl was scared, and begged them not to denounce her, and said it was only fleas. But of course it would not do to let the matter rest there. All the girls were examined, and 11 out of the 50 were badly marked. The rest less so. A commission was appointed, but the 11 only cried for their mothers and would not confess. Then they were shut up, each by herself, in the dark, and put on black bread and water for 10 days and nights. And by that time they were haggard and wild, and their eyes were dry, and they did not cry any more, but only sat and mumbled, and would not take the food. Then one of them confessed, and said they had often ridden through the air on broomsticks to the witches' sabbath, and in a bleak place high up in the mountains had danced and drunk and caroused with several 100 other witches and the evil one, and all had conducted themselves in a scandalous way, and had reviled the priests and blasphemed God. That is what she said, not in narrative form, for she was not able to remember any of the details without having them called to her mind one after the other. But the commission did that, for they knew just what questions to ask, they being all written down for the use of witch commissioners 2 centuries before. They asked, "Did you do so-and-so?" And she always said yes, and looked weary and tired, and took no interest in it. And so, when the other 10 heard that this one confessed, they confessed too, and answered yes to the questions. Then they were burned at the stake all together, which was just and right, and everybody went from all the countryside to see it. I went too, but when I saw that one of them was a bonny, sweet girl I used to play with, and looked so pitiful there chained to the stake, and her mother crying over her and devouring her with kisses, and clinging around her neck and saying, "Oh, my God, oh, my God!" It was too dreadful.